President Muhammadu Buhari meets new president of UN General Assembly, promises Nigeria's support.
Federal government's delegation to UK on P&ID case assures Nigerians of justice against foreign fraudsters.
House of Reps backs acquisition of latest technology in combating security breaches across the country.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall examine President Buhari's address at the United Nations General Assembly.
All right, now it's that time of year again. World leaders are in New York City for another session of the United Nations General Assembly. This year is the 74th of such sessions.
And you recall that Nigeria's own Professor Tijani Muhammad Bande assumed presidency of the 74th session of the UN General Assembly a week ago, and that was on the 17th of September to be precise. A development that has been described as a boost for Nigeria's image and an opportunity to project issues facing the continent and the country to the global body.
All right, and 1 week on since it opened, the 74th session has progressed into high-level speeches and debates, and dozens of world leaders are scheduled to address the body from the 24th to the 30th of this month, being September 2019.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres opened the first day of the general debate yesterday with the warning that the world was in a state of rising inequality, spreading insecurity, and impending climate crisis with just 12 years to save the planet. This began the series in calls for action against various issues facing the world today.
Exactly, Rhoda. And one big plus for Nigeria this year is the fact that President Muhammadu Buhari was the 5th world leader to speak on the theme of the current session, being galvanizing multilateral efforts for poverty eradication, quality education, climate change, and inclusion. Many world leaders were listening in the Assembly Hall, while the world also watched live on television as President Muhammadu Buhari delivered his address.
And you recall that last year, that was September, President Buhari was number 18th on the list of 87 world leaders to address the hunger. So being number 5 this year is definitely a great stride. The president did not mince words in highlighting one of the problems of Africa and many developing countries right now, and that is the issue of poverty. Now,
though poverty eradication is reflected on the theme of this assembly, President Buhari reminded world leaders that no threat is more potent than poverty and exclusion. He noted the world's collective responsibility to combat the threat of poverty for a prosperous African continent, which he said would ultimately lead to greater prosperity for the rest of the world.
That's right, Kingsley. Mr. President calls for multilateral action against xenophobia, racism, unilateralism, which he warned might threaten the principles and foundation in which the United Nations is built, and has been seen as timely, considering the current rise in hate speeches and xenophobic attacks in the world today.
Indeed, there was positive reaction at the General Assembly Hall when President Buhari called out tech companies to live up to their responsibilities and guard against the use of their online platforms and the spread of hate speech currently causing division within and between countries.
That's absolutely right, Kingsley. Many Nigerians, both at home and abroad, were particularly happy with the president's stance against organized criminal networks, corruption, money laundering, one of which is the P&ID scam, now threatening to defraud the country of $9.6 billion. Mr. President was quick to give notice to the Assembly that Nigeria will vigorously prosecute any act of fraud and corruption in the country.
All right, now we're going to have guests with us in our conversation segment to examine the issues that President Muhammadu Buhari raised in his address at the UN yesterday. It's on that note we'd like to welcome you to this edition of Good Morning Nigeria. We are broadcasting as always live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We're right here at the Abuja headquarters studios, and my name is Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Rhoda Anona. I join Kingsley, welcoming you to another wonderful and beautiful edition of the program. As always, we'll bring to you complimentary segments, and that includes the newspaper review, business, foreign, sports, and entertainment news. Now, let's join Chimaobi Walter Naji, who's already seated in the studio here with us for the morning news. Chimaobi, good morning.
Hello, Rhoda. Good morning to you, and good morning, Kingsley. Welcome to the morning news. The federal government's delegation to the United Kingdom to pursue the setting aside of the UK court's ruling against Nigeria in favor of P&ID began on a positive note, with some reassurance that Nigeria is on the right path of getting justice against a conglomeration of Nigerians and their foreign collaborating fraudsters. This was the mood that after they rounded up the first leg of a media engagement in the UK.
It has aroused international interest within the context of the truth of the matter, the undertones relating to P&ID as a case, as a judicial case, P&ID as it affects the award, and P&ID as it relates to unfolding developments that borders on fraud, corrupt practices.
And to other stories now, Vice President Yemi Osinbajo says the nation is at a crucial point of economic history where every hand must be on deck in building a greater country, and calling on financial institutions to brace up for the challenge ahead in both human and infrastructure development. The Vice President, while declaring open a two-day banking and finance conference in Abuja, stresses financial inclusion as key to realizing the President's promise to lift 100 billion people out of poverty in 10 years.
At the best times possible for business and for the Nigerian economy. I'm extremely pleased to see that the theme of this conference seeks to address the changes that we should expect, not just from the banking sector, but from the entire economy.
And now to the National Assembly, as the annual recess of the Senate is now over, as senators reconvened into an activity-packed plenary. The legislators deliberated on the $9.6 billion United States dollars court judgment against Nigeria and resolved to invite the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of the Federation to brief the Senate on the matter.
Relevant stakeholders, including officials of the Ministry of Petroleum Resources and professional arbitrators engaged on behalf of the federal government of Nigeria in this regard.
Leading, therefore, our focus should be the satisfaction of the interests of Nigerians. We cannot also lead alone. We have to continue to work with our sister arm, the House of Representatives, and indeed the executive.
The lower house, following its meeting with security chiefs, the House of Representatives, say acquisition and deployment of latest technology will no doubt enhance operations targeted at combating security breaches across the country. The issue was debated under matters of urgent public importance during Tuesday's plenary. And 300 Nigerian Air Force personnel are currently undergoing special forces training in Bauchi State as part of operations against insurgency in the northeast, where this was part of the achievements discussed during a meeting between the Chief of Air Staff and the Governor of Bauchi State, Bala Muhammad.
You are on Special Force Commander, who told me you are establishing a special command because of the geographical location and strategic position of Bauchi.
Found that we have one in Bauchi, one in Kaduna, the next one is in Ipetu Ijesha, and the whole idea is to add value to what is currently being done by other security agencies.
And let's turn our attention now a little bit to the judiciary, as the Federal High Court, presided over by Justice Taiwo has ordered the release of Omoloye Sowore within 48 hours. The statement says he is to be handed over to his counsel, Femi Falana, SAN and deposits his international passport with the Chief Registrar of the Federal High Court. And that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kingsley and Rhoda just after the break. To stay with us.
Independence Day Celebration Planning Committee announces activities lined up for the celebration as follows. Friday, 27th September, Jumat prayers and special lecture. Time 10 a.m. Venue, National Mosque, Abuja. Sunday, 29th September, Interdenominational Christian Service. Time 3 p.m. National Christian Center. Monday, 30th September, National Youth Entrepreneurship Empowerment Summit, Independence Edition. Time 9 a.m. Venue, International Conference Center, The Republic 2, Independence Edition. Youth Concert. Time 6 p.m. Venue, Millennium Park. Tuesday, 1st October, Independence Media Broadcast. Time 7 a.m. Venue, State House. Presidential Change of Guards. Time 9 a.m. Venue, State House Forecourt. Public lecture and gala night. Time 6 p.m. Venue, State House Conference Center. All public officers are expected to actively participate in the anniversary celebration as appropriate. Boss Mustafa, Chairman, 59th Independence Day Celebration Planning Committee and Secretary to the Government of the Federation. Announcer.
Imagine a luxury big breakfast on top of the world in Dubai.
To Dubai.
Collins! Hope you bought enough big milk.
Dubai, here we come!
To be one of the 20 lucky people going to enjoy a peak breakfast in Dubai, buy Peak Milk and collect your scratch card to redeem your instant win. Fill your details and return. Everyone's a winner. So keep on buying your Peak Milk and keep winning. Valid while stocks last. Reach for your peak.
He's sending me this type of letter. Don't be great. So, this type of celebration is going to happen in Lojaville. This is great. NTA and the village headmaster family are going to celebrate 50 years. Wait, you mean people have been watching village headmaster?
Kabesi, I agree with you. They have killed me, Kabesi. They have killed me, Panapata. Oh, they have killed me. Those big people in Lagos. Import license. They have killed me.
Come October 8, 10, and 11. I, Tisha Fadele of Oja Community School, will be there, live and direct. I will laugh, dance, and even dance Asonto and Shaku Shaku. And when Sonny Ade plays, I will dance Showambe. It's going to be a great celebration in Oja Village.
Thank you for joining us on Good Morning Nigeria. Now, economic experts advocate the introduction of non-tariff plans amongst regional governments to improve trade integration. We'll get more details from our business news correspondent, Chimubi Walter Naji.
Liberalization in Africa has been identified as a sure means to regional integration and growth of revenue generation in most African states. This, according to economists, is one way to facilitate trade between the over 1.2 billion people in Africa and yield a total GDP of $2.5 trillion. As one of the ways to ensure success of the African Continental Free Trade Area, experts say there is need to reduce both tariff and non-tariff barriers as a potential to substantially increase trade within the region.
What we find is that if tariffs on 90% of inter-regionally traded goods are reduced to zero, as is planned under the AfCFTA, inter-regional trade will go up by as much as 16%. There will be also big gains if other non-tariff barriers are tackled, such as improving trade logistics and infrastructure.
In other stories, the United Nations World Food Programme, WFP, has announced its readiness to expand support to humanitarian and development programs, especially in northeastern Nigeria. This is based on a new country strategic plan, which is expected to last for the next 4 years. The WFP country director in Nigeria, Matter Cloud, noted that the effort is in the United Nations bid to engage relevant stakeholders in a strategic blueprint to solve the problems of dependence on food assistance in some parts of the country. And now to the equities market. Here is a graphic representation of closing figures.
Business News, I'm Chimobi Walter Naji.
Thank you very much, Chimobi, for the business package. Next for us on the program, we'll take a look at the front pages of some of today's newspapers.
As always, our regular newspaper reviewer Bayo Atoibi is here in the studio to give us more insight and depth into our analysis this morning. Bayo, good morning.
Good morning, Rhoda.
Good
morning, Kingsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, Bayo, good to see you.
We have a couple of papers with us this morning. We have the Punch, the Sun, the New Telegraph, and the Blueprint. Let's begin with the Sun and just the Sun News, the Punch. The Punch newspaper, let's begin with that. It's just above the nameplate. It says, FG, federal government denies Guinness, Dangote, 13 orders tax relief. That's on page 25. And work begins on Kano Rail project soon, says Amechi. And let's go down now to the lead story. The lead story for the Punch this morning is still on the issue of the P&ID. It says $9.6 billion judgment P&ID case, a scam, says Buhari at the UN. $9.6 billion naira judgment, $1 billion judgment P&ID case, a scam, says Buhari at UN. That's the lead story for the Punch this morning. And it's on page 2. Malami leads EFCC lawyer, so Yedekbo, Kolo Show, and 5 others. That's the rider to the lead story there. And the picture story is that of President Muhammadu Buhari at the UN General Debate of the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York yesterday, Tuesday. And beside that picture story, Obasanjo behind my impeachment over his third term bid, says Ladoja. That's on page 2. 6 die, 17 are injured in Gombe crash. That's on page 7 of the Punch. A court reserves judgment on Milaye and Adeyemi senatorial tussle. That's on page 9. And those are the stories leading on the front page of the Punch this morning. Kingsley.
All right, let's take a look at the New Telegraph. New Telegraph, below the nameplate, starting off with the lead story. Lead story says, Atiku files 66-point appeal against Buhari. That's on page 2 in greater detail. We have a number of writers to that headline. False tribunals ruling. Certificates are evidence of qualification. One Supreme Court to invalidate president's victory. In seats, APC candidate not qualified to run. That story is in greater detail on page 2. And below the photograph there, you still have a story of the P&ID. It says P&ID, that's the kicker. Nigeria won't tolerate foreign criminals. That's attributed to the federal government. Actually, it was President Muhammadu Buhari who stated that yesterday in New York. And warns P&ID over $9.6 billion contract scam. Magu, corruption responsible for insecurity and kidnappings. That's on page 2. Now, below the nameplate of New Telegraph, you have 4 headlines there. Kayabo and Alasho Adura swap ministries. That's page 31. Rep. 8 of 10 councils in Borno North are under Boko Haram. That's on page 6. And PDP seeks answers to 90 billion naira FIRS scandal. That's on page 10. Court orders release of Showore. Details can be found also on page 10. And for the Blueprint, well, let me just take the Blueprint so you can then take all the stories together. Blueprint newspaper, it says below the nameplate, Buhari to world leaders, we must take action against xenophobia and social media. And then you have some headlines beside the nameplate there. Nigeria produces 34% milk demand. That's according to a survey. And Bayelsa and Kogi polls, candidates final list out October 17, according to INEC, and reps seek special fund to tackle insurgency. That's page 8. Let's fight corruption together. Magu begs Nigerians, says commission rated highly globally. And alerts on graft at National Social Investment Program. That's the alert now coming from Magu. Details can be found on page 6. And then one of the two photographs there on the front page of the Blueprint newspaper, the photograph to the left, you can see President Muhammadu Buhari, number 5 on the role of world leaders to address the UN General Assembly yesterday. And behind him is the president, in the middle there is the president of the UN General Assembly, Nigeria's own ambassador, Tijani Bande, and to his right is the UN Deputy Secretary General, also a Nigerian former Minister of Environment. APC governors move to end executive legislative face-off. That's page 6. Senate summons Malami and others over $9.6 billion verdict. And EU insists assist Nigeria's CSOs with 13.5 million euros for sustainable development. 1 killed, 4 injured as customs and smugglers clash in Casino.
Well, Kingsley, indeed, that picture you just reviewed shows one of Nigeria's highest stands on the world stage, where you have a shot of 4 persons at the UNGA, United Nations General Assembly, and 3 of those persons are Nigerians. And President Muhammadu Buhari also used the occasion to tell the United Nations General Assembly that no threat is more potent than poverty and exclusion. He was speaking at the 74th UNGA yesterday, and he told the plenary that the common criminality, insurgency, cross-border crimes, human trafficking, and their terrible consequences are all part of the consequences that is causing poverty in the world. He asserted that poverty is one of the greatest challenges facing the world, adding that its eradication is indispensable requirement for achieving sustainable development. President Muhammadu Buhari used the occasion to draw attention to what Nigeria is doing, and he highlighted the fact that in Nigeria, the most vulnerable people are being assisted, for instance, for access to finance, for traders, artisans, and market women. The initiative is to lessen the event and eventually eliminate poverty. On building inclusivity, he says Nigeria has program that targets women and youth participation in governance, industry, climate action, and agriculture. The theme of the UN General Assembly was actually galvanizing multinational efforts and poverty eradication, quality education, climate action, and inclusion. On inclusion, the president's called for the expansion of the Security Council to reflect the diversity and dynamics of the 21st century. Of course, Nigeria is also being championed by the African leaders and Nigeria itself to have representation on the Security Council. Speaking on process and industrial development, President Muhammadu Buhari described it as an attempt to swindle Nigeria, for which the international community's attention must be drawn to. The president also charged major technological companies to be alive to their duties to humanity. This is emphasizing the damage that the social media is causing. He highlighted how that they should not be allowed to continue to facilitate and spread religious, racist, xenophobia, and false messages. These are capable of inciting communities against one another and also leading to loss of life. This, he says, could cause set some nations apart. So the hunger is on, and the president actually highlighted the initiatives in Nigeria and also particularly for climate change. One of the highlight was to establish 1,500 kilometers square by 15 kilometers of a green belt as part of combating desertification.
All right, Bayo. Kingsley?
Hold on, I have
all right, let's quickly take our editorial for today. And our editorial is on the Daily Sun, and it's speaking to the issue of suicide. It says, curbing the suicide scourge. I'll just take the first paragraph. They said the World Health Organization recently raised the alarm of the rising cases of suicides across the world, and one person dies by suicide every 40 seconds. Although 38 countries have developed national suicide prevention strategies, the World Health Organization is of the view that more countries need to develop policies that would prevent suicide. And another paragraph I'll take, it says many Nigerians believe that one of the ways to check the rising cases of suicide amongst young people is for government to create more jobs for them. And government should also diversify the economy, put more measures in place to ensure the well-being of all Nigerians. The government must also create an enabling environment that will encourage industrial and economic growth. All tiers of government must work together to create more jobs for unemployed Nigerians.
Well, just said that every suicide every 40 seconds, that gives you about 2,160 in a day. And that is quite alarming around the world. And the attention that has been drawn is that for this year alone, 800,000 persons by the UN standard died from suicide, and already 16 million also made attempt but did not succeed to kill themselves. They have identified the causes, which is frustration, particularly with the youths. It is related to lack of job, and for us in Nigeria, they have advised that the best solution is to create an enabling environment so that the youth can get employment. It also refers to the statistics as far as Nigeria is concerned. In May this year, we have had as many as 10 persons killing themselves. And since 2019, for the last 9.5 months, we have about 50 persons that have committed suicide. So we are urging federal and state government to create an enabling environment and also embark on sensitization. There is also a danger that has been drawn out that Nigeria presently has only about 250 psychiatrists, while we in the country we have about 60 million who are suffering from some mental disorders. Of course, some of the victims are a factor of mental challenges. You recall the guy who is moving around killing people, killing women in Port Harcourt, is obviously a case of mental challenges. And so the editorial is happening on that. We need more psychiatrists to be able to handle 60 million Nigerians who have such tendencies about suicide.
You know, that's a challenge we have in this part of the world. Mental health, anything that happens, people tend to say probably it's spiritual, or the person is taking weed or something. Some of these people actually have mental challenges.
You see, it's not every mental challenge that is madness. But unfortunately, our people tend to think that if you have a mental challenge, then it becomes a stigma, and most often than not, we tend to hide it until it aggravates and becomes very serious. So the earlier people report their psychological challenges, the better, and they can be helped. Not every psychological or psychiatric challenge is madness.
That's right, Bayo. Incidentally, the two issues you just touched on, mental health and the propensity for some persons to take their lives these days. There are matters that we've had the opportunity of interrogating in our conversation segment on Good Morning Nigeria, and we do hope that appropriate measures will be taken to provide early support to persons who might be at risk, as it were, of attempting or actually seeking to take their own lives. I think that's very important. So, Bayo, I would like to thank you. One issue, unfortunately, we have not seen it on the front pages of our papers, and so we haven't discussed it. I'm sure you're familiar. The story has been out there since Monday. On Sunday, the very familiar Thomas Cook, Thomas Cook, world's renowned travel agency, tour operator. I mean, any person of our generation who at one time or the other didn't use the services of Thomas Cook. Traveler's checks. That is certainly, it meant that you probably hadn't left, the shores of your country. Thomas Cook, 178 years as a company, went bust on Sunday. So, I'll say rest in peace.
All right, Bayo, we thank you so much for being a part of the program this morning. Hopefully we'll see you again tomorrow morning. You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a break now, and of course we have guests here in our studio this morning. President Muhammadu Buhari was the fifth speaker yesterday at UNGA 74, and he gave his address. And so when we come back, We'll be looking at that speech, examine what he said, and of course the gains for Nigeria.
They are there at the crack of dawn. They are there busy preparing while we rise for our day. They are there silently, guarding, waiting, listening, and watching. They are there ready in the sky above and the waters below, in the blistering heat of the day, in the dead of night, willing, indefatigable, determined in the defense of the sovereignty of our country. They are our first line of defense and our last. They who have paid the ultimate price in defending us. They are fathers and uncles. They are mothers and sisters and girlfriends and boyfriends. They are brothers and cousins and best friends and neighbors. They are classmates, colleagues, and citizens of this nation. They are our defenders and deserve our respect, our prayers, our thoughts. Nigeria, please support our armed forces.
The NTA ETV Annual Expo is here again. This time, it's the 13th edition with the theme Promoting Unity and Innovations in Youths as Agents of Change Through Science and Arts. It promises to be captivating as youths across the nation showcase their unique skills and innovations in science and arts, make new friends, and showcase their rich cultural heritage. Join us at the NTA Headquarters Arena, Area 11, Garki, Abuja from Sunday 20th October to Thursday 24th October 2019. For more information, participation, and sponsorship, please call these numbers. NTA ETV, promoting learning.
To the outer framers, the hat tippers, the fringe goers, you don't need to hide anymore. Try Dettol Even Tone. It cleans and helps to reduce the appearance of blemishes caused by oil, dirt, and germs, giving your skin a healthy feel for an even better you.
Introducing the new Dettol Even Tone Pink Glow. Healthy skin feel for an even better you.
All right, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. On Tuesday, September 24th, President Muhammadu Buhari delivered his address at the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly taking place in New York. President Buhari's address brought critical perspectives to the theme of this year's General Assembly session. Let's now listen to this report put together by our State House correspondent, Adamu Sambo, who is in New York City.
With enormous sense of pride and fulfillment, President Muhammadu Buhari takes the floor of the United Nations General Assembly presided over for the first time in 30 years by his countryman and seasoned diplomat Tijani Muhammad Bande. Addressing the largest gathering of world leaders for the 5th time since coming to power, the Nigerian leader, perhaps taking cognizance of the heavy weight on his shoulders, virtually spoke for Africa. He said time has come for industrial countries to take a long-term view of Africa and genuinely support its developmental efforts through collective action to combat threats of poverty and exclusion.
A developed Africa will not be antagonistic to industrialized countries, but will become friends and partners in prosperity, security, and development. A prosperous Africa will mean greater prosperity for the rest of the world. A poor Africa will be a drag on the rest of the world. Is this what the international community wants?
President Buhari challenged the United Nations to take the lead on issues that continue to cloud the prospects for international peace and prosperity, especially the rights of the Palestinian people to have their own country, risks associated with nuclear proliferation, unfair and unjust trading practices, as well as the looming danger of climate change.
On climate change, Nigeria stands resolutely with the international community in observing agreed carbon emission targets, which I signed in 2015. As we advocate and strive for inclusion within our societies, we must also ensure inclusion prevails in our collective action as members of the international community. That is why we support the expansion of the Security Council to reflect the diversity and dynamics of the 21st century.
And as violence and threats of conflicts continue to blight the lives of too many people globally, the president said Nigeria is no exception, saying, however, that in the last elections that renewed his mandate, the people backed the politics of tolerance, inclusion, and community over politics of protest and division.
Our election promises emphasized political stability, freedom and prosperity, tackling poverty, schooling our young and providing them with the tools to build better lives. Our progress and delivery are deliberate, purposeful, and measured. We clearly appreciate there are no quick fixes to complex challenges.
President Buhari is, however, worried that the social media networks now facilitate the spread of religious, racist, xenophobic, and false messages capable of tearing some countries apart, saying major tech companies must be alive to their responsibilities.
Organized criminal networks, often acting with impunity across international borders, present new challenges where only collective action can deliver genuine results. This is true in the battle against violent extremism, against trafficking in people and drugs, and against corruption and money laundering. The present Nigerian government is facing the challenges of corruption head-on. We are giving notice to international criminal groups by the vigorous prosecution of the fee and ID scam attempting to cheat Nigeria of billions of dollars.
All right, that was State House correspondent Adamu Sambo giving us excerpts of President Muhammadu Buhari's address yesterday at the UN General Assembly. We have a guest with us here in the Abuja studios. We'll also be joining Femi Adesina, who is the President's Special Advisor on Media and Publicity, via Skype from New York City, and another guest in Lagos.
All right, we'll begin with our guest here who's seated in the studio. He is Ambassador Dauda Danladi. He is Nigeria's former ambassador to Pakistan. Ambassador, thank you for joining us on the program this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Also joining us via Skype, just as Kingsley indicated, is Femi Adesina. He is a special advisor to the President on media and publicity. Femi Adesina, it's good to have you join us on the program this morning.
Good morning, Nigeria. Thank you.
And also from Lagos, we have with us Professor Joshua Bolarinwa of the Nigerian Institute for International Affairs joining us from our Lagos studio. Prof, good morning. It's good to have you join us on the program this morning.
All right, I'm sure that we clear up the audio link from our Lagos studios. But let's begin the conversation with Femi Adesina, who is in New York. Femi, let's get you on the screen now and get your comments. We know that it's still small hours in New York. You're at least 5 hours behind us. But give us a sense of the reception of the audience of President Muhammadu Buhari's address at the 74th General Assembly. What were the optics?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Good morning once again. You know, there is an advantage, huge advantage in speaking early. And as number 5 speaker, President Buhari had the advantage of speaking to a fairly filled hall. You know what happens is that after each speaker, his countrymen and those who are interested in listening to such speaker will leave the hall. But when you speak early, when you're number 5 like our president was, you have the advantage of speaking to a fairly filled hall. So the hall was full and the reception was keen, and the applause that followed showed that not just Nigerians, but people across the world listened to and appreciated what our president said. It was a very good speech, well delivered and well received, and there was very good audience after it. I believe every Nigerian in that General Assembly yesterday was satisfied. We were happy with the delivery and happy with the reception, not only by Nigerians, but people across the world who are in the General Assembly and who are watching, even on television and other means of communication around the world.
And Fabi, still with you. I mean, we've had cause to link up with you in New York when President Muhammadu Buhari had been to the United Nations General Assembly. In other words, I mean, you're familiar with the president's appearances at the UN General Assembly since he came into office in 2015. How would you rank his appearance in 2019?
Yes, I think we saw a president that was sure-footed, that was calm, that was at ease, that was peaceful, and that was in charge of his script. Over the years, our president had looked good, but yesterday he looked very, very well as he spoke to the world.
In terms of the subject matter that the president touched on, I mean, it's the view out there is that he brought in critical perspectives from the African point of view, if you like, and more particularly the Nigerian point of view. He touched on issues, for example, relating to xenophobia. He also touched on P&ID, which is a critical issue for us in Nigeria today, and more particularly how the rest of the world, which is the industrialized world, should relate to Africa and help Africa out of its poverty trap. Why did the president take this approach? I mean, it's obvious, but let me ask you.
Yes, the United Nations is like a global stage and perhaps the biggest stage in the world. Therefore, you take issues that your own, local issues, and you internationalize them. It now happened that issues that are local now for Nigeria are also like global issues. So it just resonated with the rest of the world. When you talk of xenophobia, it affects not only Nigeria, particularly in South Africa, it affects Africa in general. You saw what happened to President Cyril Ramaphosa when he attended the burial of Robert Mugabe. It shows you that Africa was aching, Africa was hurting. And it was not just an issue for Nigeria, but an issue for the continent. Then talking about the murder of about 50 people praying in New Zealand. It was a hate murder fueled by social media. Not only Nigeria has been affected, it's a global issue. You have hatred being fanned by the social media all over the world. And so the president took a challenge. Major tech companies should not just make themselves as available for global communication, they must also have safeguards that ensure that hatred does not fester. Then you have climate change. It has often been said that there's no planet B. This is the only planet we have. If we don't take care of the planet, the entire world will be imperiled. It's happening in Nigeria. We saw how the shrinkage of Lake Chad has exacerbated the Boko Haram insurgency, and how people, young people particularly, are daring the desert and daring the Mediterranean to try to get to Europe. So it's a Nigerian issue, it's an African issue, and it's a global issue. You find that almost all the issues raised by the president are Nigerian in nature, but they are also global. Fight against corruption. For instance, he said, this government is fighting corruption head-on. You can't fight corruption alone. You need the rest of the world. There are safe havens all over the world where people stash loot. You therefore need their cooperation to be able to fight corruption successfully. That is the trend of the speech. Nigerian issues are global issues, and therefore you need global collaboration to tackle those issues.
All right, Mr. Femi Adesina, what is likely to be the biggest gain for Nigeria in this year's hunger?
I'll say it is pointing the world's attention to Nigeria's successes. Particularly, see how the president spoke about tackling poverty. He spoke about poverty being a danger to the entire world. And he came out with what Nigeria has done, particularly with the social investment program, the successes, the many lives that have been touched. And it was also reassuring that wanting to take 100 million people out of poverty in 10 years was not just a pie in the sky. Something is being done. He mentioned successes about N-Power, about trader money, about the Jeep scheme and all that. So Nigeria has started. Nigeria is moving. It may be slow, but it is sure, and it's something that will grow. Therefore, I think our greatest success at Hunger 74 is that we have been able to tell the world the true Nigerian story. Even he mentioned our election, how Nigerians reposed confidence in his administration to the detriment of an administration that I said wanted to come in through appeal to violence and division. Therefore, the world is able to get a good picture of what is happening in Nigeria on the political scene, on the economic scene, on the socio-political scene. And that's it was done on the world's biggest stage, and the world listened and noted.
All right, Femi, we're going to pause you in the meantime and then turn to our other guests. We have earlier Professor Joshua Bolarinwa of the Institute of International Affairs at Victoria Island. He's right there in our studios in Lagos, and with us here in the Abuja studios, Ambassador Dauda Danladi, who is a familiar guest on Good Morning Nigeria. Let's come first to our Abuja studios and get Ambassador Dauda Danladi's comments on the President's delivery of his address in New York yesterday.
Well, I think once Mr. Femi speaks, he actually captures the essence of Mr. President's speech. But let me just say this, that the General Assembly is the world's parliament. Even though it does not have much powers like the Security Council, it still makes recommendations, express opinions on critical issues, and make recommendations to the UN Security Council, who passes on resolutions, binding resolutions. Again, the UN General Assembly is a platform that allows heads of governments to present various challenges that they are facing in their countries, and also issues that affects the world, and possibly give priorities for what they are trying to do in their countries in order to achieve development. So I think the President has captured, in essence, the critical challenges that Nigeria and indeed Africa is facing. He has called for strong action against anti-globalization, if I may use that word, which has now given rise to racism, xenophobia, and of course extremism and terrorism. And he has called for greater action on abject poverty, to combat abject poverty. You see, the FOA have stated that about 257 million people are living with hunger in Africa, majority in sub-Saharan Africa. In Nigeria, the FOA gave a figure of about 5.1 million people that are malnourished, and about 8.5 million people require humanitarian assistance. But I think the president has given the deliverables, what has been done. Let me quickly say this, that the various programs that the government has put in place, like the Anko Broa program, the Agricultural Revolution, which is anchored by the CBN, no state in Nigeria today that cannot boast of providing at least 100,000 jobs to its citizens through the Anko Broa scheme. One of the schemes, if I may quickly mention, is the Accelerated Agricultural Development Program, where states are just required clear 1,000 hectares, allocate 1 hectare to each farmer or to each youth, and you have about 10,000 youth that will be engaged. So I think he has aptly addressed that. Going forward, yes, we are facing a lot of challenges in terms of the climate change. About 2.8 billion people are affected by flood around the globe. And in the case of Nigeria, I think last year over 400 people were affected. About 142 people were displaced. We have lost over 120,000 hectares of farmland, which is a big loss. If you recall back last year, the central bank has disbursed over 150 billion for rice production in Nigeria, and Nigeria gradually is now becoming a net exporter of rice. But the flood has devastated almost 30% of what was cultivated last year. So I think the need for a decisive action on climate change is apt, and I think the president has made it very clear, abundantly clear. And if you look at the president's speech and you look at the vision of the president of the 74th session, Ambassador Tijani Mohamed Bande, his vision is peace and security, quality education, eradication of poverty. It resonates with what the president have said. And the issue of fighting corruption, it calls for a collaboration. And at the same time, the issue of recovery also calls for strengthening the mechanisms at the international level, so that there will be a multilateral efforts to fast track the recovery of assets. Going forward, the president has also talked about the issue of impliedly desertification, which is also a result of climate change. He has also talked about the need to combat extremism. As you know, fighting Boko Haram has now assumed an international dimension, because just last year or so, the president was able to put, immediately coming to office, he was able to put the multinational task force to combat the menace of terrorism. And when you talk about fighting terrorism, you are talking about equipping the armed forces, which is very, very expensive. An APC cost almost about $750,000 to about $1 million. So it is quite expensive. You need collaboration, intelligence sharing, information sharing. You need the participation of not only at the regional level, but at international level, to combat the menace of terrorism. So I think, in summary, I think the president has done well. He has addressed squarely the challenges that the African continent is facing, and he has put across solutions. He has talked about the need to enforce some of the resolutions that have been passed in the past. And he has talked about this inclusion, the expansion of the UN Security Council. In Nigeria, looking at the strategic geopolitical position that Nigeria occupies, I mean, one cannot emphasize the need for Nigeria to be a member of the Security Council.
All right, so, Ambassador Dauda Danladi, that's another issue that we'll speak to in the course of this conversation. But then let's bring in our other guest who's in Lagos, and that's Professor Joshua Bolarinwa of the Nigerian Institute for International Affairs. Prof, once again, good morning. Let's get your views, or let's get your thoughts on the President's address yesterday.
Good morning. The President has done so well in his speech, trying to galvanize Nigeria's efforts with the other parts of the world, and following the theme of the current 74th General Assembly session of the United Nations, where the theme is galvanizing multilateral efforts against poverty eradication, quality education, social climate action, and inclusion. So the President tried to analyze and bring to bear a lot of issues affecting the globe, and particularly Nigeria. He was able to thank the General Assembly, thank the world leaders for electing Nigerian ambassador to the United Nations, Professor Ambassador Tijani Bande, as the 74th General Assembly President. And not only that, he called on the galvanizing global efforts, multilateral efforts on global issues like racism, xenophobia. He also talked about the need to increase and improve quality education. There is need for multilateral effort in improving quality education. Of course, he reminded the world that Nigeria, on December 3rd, 2018, Nigeria and 58 other countries moved to have quality education, and this became a General Assembly Resolution 7525. And this resolution became what the world accepted, or what the General Assembly adopted as January 24th as the International Day for Quality Education. So he also reminded the world at the General Assembly speech that there was need for a concerted effort, and he reminded the world the way the United States has helped to develop Europe after the Second World War, how United States also developed Japan, improved their economy, and improved trade relations. So he challenged the world that they should come to Africa, develop Africa, and try to help Africa out of its poverty. And Africa is poor, and some other parts of the world are also poor, and that there is need for multilateral efforts, particularly industrialized economies like the US, Europe, Japan, China, and others. They should come and help Africa, and that if Africa is rich and developed and industrialized, it will be the happiness of the world. But if Africa is poor, then it will affect the world at large, particularly the industrialized countries. President Muhammadu Buhari also reminded the world on the concerted effort against racism, and that this global stage called the General Assembly of the United Nations had fought apartheid, fought racism, and all of that to have brought us to where we are. But again, there's an increasing tide of racism now, of xenophobia, what is happening in South Africa and some other places. So President Muhammadu Buhari called for a global action against xenophobia, against racism, even concerted and multilateral efforts in fighting terrorism, insurgencies all over the world.
All right. Professor Joshua Bolarinwa, of course, an associate professor at NIA. Thank you very much there for your initial comments. Let's return to Ambassador Dauda Danladi, and then we'll go over again to Femi Adesina via Skype. The context of the president's perspectives on some of the issues. For instance, the president drew attention to the fact that this is the 100th anniversary of what used to be known as the League of Nations. The League of Nations was, of course, formed at the end of the First World War. Unfortunately, the League of Nations collapsed, and then we now had the UN, which came on in 1945. But arising from the UN, and which was the end of the Second World War, was the Marshall Plan, which, of course, enabled the United States to help rebuild Europe and also Japan. And that Europe and Japan and the US benefited from the Marshall Plan. President Buhari therefore invited not just the United States at this time, but the industrialized world to say, look, take a look at the African continent. The various threats that we're talking about today arise from the fact that, look, this is a poor continent, but if you were to leave this continent by the bootstraps, out of poverty, the world would indeed be a much better place for all. In other words, it would be a win-win situation. Ambassador Dauda Danladi, give us your sense of how you appreciate what the president said and how this point might be re-echoed and re-echoed over time to be a game changer for the African continent.
Well, I think if you to give an incisive analysis of what the president's speech, I think this president's speech was talking to the world that, look, in Africa, we have abundant human and natural resources. And what is required is to assist multilaterally, bring in the investment, to invest in Africa. You see, the backward integration policy of that Nigeria has adopted calls for investors to come and establish agro-based industries, for example, off-takers that can off-take what is now massively being produced in Nigeria. The resuscitation of our textile industry, already the president has made a giant stride internally. I think about 2 or 3 months ago, the president approved 30 billion naira through the Unity Bank for disbursement to the Cotton Producers Association of Nigeria. And the impact of that is to mobilize farmers that will produce cotton so that we can resuscitate our ginneries, so that we can resuscitate our moribund textile industries. As you know, we spend billions of naira importing textile materials. Again, the president's speech, looking at it critically, is saying, look, it is high time for even the African countries to unite. Until we are able to unite and to build a robust economy, it will not be possible for us to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. He has called for bridging the gap towards attaining the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, Professor Bande has identified that we are lacking in terms of the achievement of sustainable goals. We are lacking in some key areas. One of the areas is hunger. The other areas is poverty eradication and quality education. And I think this issue of inclusion, if you look at what the government is doing here in Nigeria, the homegrown school feeding system, where it gives opportunity to all children to go to school, the Empower, the market money, these are all programs that government has put in place in order to address. But you cannot, we don't live in isolation. So you need a multilateral approach. You need a collaborative partnership. For example, there is no way, for example, you can effectively repatriate stash funds abroad without putting in place international mechanism and cooperation that will assist in repatriating these funds. There's no way that you can achieve quality education. The tendency now, we are moving towards knowledge-based economy. And to achieve that, you need qualitative education. And there's the need for collaboration, sharing of ideas, sharing of experiences, student exchange programs. You cannot achieve that without bilateral and multilateral approaches so that you can share this information and technology. He has also cautioned, and one thing that is very, very critical is this xenophobia issue. This issue has a tendency to derail the African continental trade. The first single largest continental trade agreement has been signed in Africa. That is an agreement that will unite Africa. It is an agreement that will boost trade, hopefully, to about almost 6.7 trillion US dollars by the year 2030. If you have that kind of funds, of course you can compete comfortably with other continental economies. So I think the president is drawing attention that, look, it is time for us to reposition the United Nations to play the critical role it is supposed to play. Because the Charter of the UN stresses the need to promote peace and security, to promote prosperity and social justice, respect for human dignity, and of course the protection of the environment. This is the Charter of the United Nations. And if the UN derailed from that, there are looming dangers. And that looming dangers is what the president has aptly emphasized in his speech.
All right, Ambassador Dauda Danladi, thank you very much. Let's go now to New York, where we have Femi Adesina. Femi Adesina, earlier you highlighted most of the issues that the president spoke to in his address, but then let's speak deeper to them. One of them is his administration's fight against corruption. My question is, how does this inspire international investment into the country? And also take along with it the fact that the president called out tech giants to live up to their responsibility in terms of how, their platform is being used, especially now that we're experiencing hate speeches. What was the reaction like when he spoke to that?
Thank you. Fighting corruption, you'll see that it's a global issue in which the world must pull together in the same direction. There is going to be a furtherance of that today because Nigeria is going to have a side event in which we'll be looking at how to curb illicit flows from Africa. It's been championed by Nigeria. The acting chairman of the EFCC, Ibrahim Magu, will be there. It's been organized by AUAD, NEPAD, and the EFCC. The president is going to be there. He's going to make a presentation on how to curb illicit flows out of Africa. That shows you that fighting corruption is serious business. Yesterday, he spoke about Nigeria fighting it frontally and spoke about the P&ID scam on Nigeria, and he said it will be vigorously prosecuted. So that is showing that for us in Nigeria, fighting corruption is not just a mantra. It has gone beyond a mantra. It's a vehicle that is in full motion. And the rest of the world is needed because when there are illicit flows, where do they flow to? They flow to certain safe havens all over the world. So the president is challenging the world that not only should you fight corruption, but don't make yourself open as a safe haven for illicit flows, particularly from Africa. It's been said at a former AU meeting that the minimum of illicit flows from Africa is $50 billion in a year. That's $50 billion worth of development, $50 billion worth of investment in education, $50 billion worth of money that could be spent to fight climate change. The president said that a climate catastrophe is facing the world. You need funds to recharge Lake Chad, diverting water from the Congo Basin. Will take a minimum of $50 billion, and that's about the amount that flows from Africa yearly. So, for Africa and the rest of the world, fighting corruption head-on is something that is a war that must be won. If it is not won, then how do you tackle poverty? How do you tackle unemployment? How do you improve education? How do you develop your country and the continent? So it's serious business, fighting corruption in Nigeria, in Africa, and in the rest of the world. The other part of your question was on the tech companies who make
All right, Femi, there. Sorry, we're having a freeze of your Skype connection. We hope we're able to unfreeze it and then get you back online to be part of this conversation. Let's return to Lagos, where Bolarinwa is still with us. Bolarinwa, earlier you gave us, a lowdown of the key points of the president's speech, and as my colleague Rhoda has also indicated, we are now drilling into some of those key points. I would like you to respond to the question I put earlier to Ambassador Danladi with regard to the president's call on the industrialized world for a kind of Marshall Plan for the African continent. For the fact that the issues we talk about, poverty, poor education, insecurity, and various threats, they have a foundation in the fact that Africa, remains poor. But that if Africa were to be lifted out of its current doldrums, the entire world would be a lot better for it. What is your take on this? And how feasible might this be? I mean, what more would be required to ensure that, look, this becomes a global agenda for, say, look, get Africa out of poverty, and whatever funds have been siphoned out of the continent could, of course, come back by way of investment, if not outright repatriation.
Yes, thank you, sir. Actually, poverty eradication is one of the major goals of Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which actually were adopted in 2015. Beyond this, the president is trying to galvanize. The president is trying to galvanize. The president is trying to pull for global efforts on how to eradicate poverty in Africa and other parts of the world. He emphasized and tried to remind the industrialized world, particularly the United States, like you said, that immediately after the end of the Second World War, through the Marshall Plan, the United States tried to rebuild Europe. And rebuilding Europe, rebuilding our economy, and trying to also help Japan and rebuilding Japanese economy. Beyond this, he called on these industrialized economies that they should come and help Africa out of poverty. If Africa is lifted out of poverty, if Africa is helped out of this poverty syndrome, I think they say when hunger is out of one's problem, all other things are solved or settled. So President Muhammadu Buhari has been trying to push for end to poverty. Actually, in one of his action plans, even before the election and after the general election of 2019, President Muhammadu Buhari said one of his aims is that from now onward, Nigeria is planning to lift about 10 million Nigerians out of poverty in the next 10 years. So the Nigerian government, through President Muhammadu Buhari, is trying to pull for a global, concerted, multilateral efforts in ending poverty. And that if poverty is ended in Africa, if industries are built in Africa by these industrialized economies, if Africa is helped out of this poverty issue, poverty syndrome, then the world will be peaceful and Africa will be happy, the world will be very happy. Beyond this, apart from poverty eradication, quality education is also a major aim of the Sustainable Development Goals. That if there is quality education around the world, if Africa has access to quality education, then there will be room for development. Of course, they say education is the bedroom of development or bedrock of development. If there is quality education, fortunately again, it was Nigeria and 58 other countries in 2018 who actually made a proposition or a proposal for quality education to be enhanced across the world. And this became a resolution of the General Assembly that every January 24th of every year becomes International Day of Education. So President Muhammadu Buhari reminded the world at the General Assembly that please let us move multilaterally, let us move jointly, let us all pool our efforts in making sure that poor education is eradicated, quality education is embraced. If we embrace quality education, the world will develop, Africa will develop, and there will be development. Of course, there's a long road to development, poverty eradication, quality education, social inclusion. If everybody is carried along, there will be equality. Those who go to equity, they go with clearance. So,
all right, thank you very much, Balarin. Well, let's return to Femi Adesina in New York. We understand that our connection to him is clear now. Femi, I mean, this is just as a joke. I'm wondering, your posture tends to give the impression that you are in a space capsule. You know, you're looking up, and we're wondering. Well, we know that all is well, all is well with you. But I would like to have your comments on this with regard to President Buhari's proposition of a Marshall Plan-like investment and focus on the African continent for the betterment of the entire world. How feasible might this be?
Well, there are antecedents to that. It happened with Europe, it happened with Japan, and see what has become of Europe as a continent, see what has become of Japan as a country. There are formidable forces in the world today. So if that is done for Africa, why not? But he also tried to lay to rest whatever fears may be at the back of the minds of the people that will help Africa grow. Africa will not be antagonistic when it comes into his own, so to speak. Rather, Africa will be a friend of the rest of the world. And it's important. But the flip side of it is that if it is not done, Africa then has the potential of becoming a problem to the rest of the world. You see the enormity of the problem of illegal migration now. People daring the Sahara Desert, daring the Mediterranean to flock into Europe. And there are many thousands from different countries in Africa. So an emancipated Africa is a good development for the rest of the world. That was the point that President Buhari was trying to make.
I'm wondering, Femi, I mean, this looks like a subject matter that can and indeed should be pursued vigorously. I mean, some persons are indicating that President Buhari obviously spoke on behalf of the African continent and that Nigeria's leadership position on the continent was clearly not in doubt when the president spoke. Because you take a look around, the continent is rich in resources, whether agriculture or otherwise, and yet, you know, jobs are scarce, and yet, you know, there's hunger in the land. Are you sure that, you know, if this matter were taken up to other fora, you've accompanied the president on a number of international trips, that this is an idea that its time has come, that look, let's let the rest of the world, let's just say the developed world, undertake a Marshall Plan for the continent rather than the tokenism that we have seen in terms of development aid?
Yes, like you said, Africa is rich in resources, but you find that the continent is also porous in terms of those resources filtering out of the continent. Therefore, the Marshall Plan, if one comes eventually, will also include how to keep Africa's resources in Africa. for African development, rather than those resources being taken out to develop other economies in the world. So I think Africa has potentials, but the continent has been at the level of potentials for too long. These potentials need to be tapped. They need to be used for the continent. They need to be used for the people of the continent, Nigeria inclusive.
All right, Femi, still staying with you. Earlier on, I knew you were already speaking to the issue of the president having some sideline meetings. That's a high-level meetings on illicit, transfer of, in terms of illicit transfer, in terms of finances from Africa to other parts of Europe. We also know that the president will be having some high-level meetings too with international businessmen. Speak to us on that.
Yes, today particularly is a loaded day. I've seen the program. The president is going to engage with the president of Portugal in a bilateral meeting. He's going to engage with a former Australian president in a bilateral meeting, something that has to do with developing the water resources and potentials of Nigeria in collaboration with Australia. He's going to engage with Bill Gates and our own Aliko Dangote. Is going to engage with Bayo Ogunlesi, somebody who is a big player in aviation. I think he owned a huge part of the Heathrow Airport. And then in the early evening, he's going to speak at the side meeting being organized by AUAD, NEPAD, and EFCC on curbing illicit flows out of Africa. So you see that it's a full day for the president and the Nigerian delegation here. But we in the media department, we will try to keep Nigerians abreast with what is happening from here.
All right, thank you very much, Femi. We have tweets here from our viewers watching here at home. And of course, they have treated us on their own response to the president's speech at UNGA 74. We'll take some of those tweets now, but also just remind our viewers that you can be a part of this conversation. If you have questions for our guests or you have comments, tweet at us at our Twitter handle. That's at NTAGMN. But let's take the tweets that we have now. I'll begin with Shitu 100. He says, great speech, straight to the point, no rigmarole around on serious issues, now embellished with with great pictures. All right, thank you very much.
Now, Mike Anyako tweets, now the whole world needs peace and development. Africa needs development and peace. President Muhammadu Buhari's speech at UNGA is a welcome one. Developed nations should help developing countries in all strata of human endeavors, peace and unity. They should help to fight hunger, disease and insecurity.
And this one is from Badamosi Haruna Adamu. He says the speech is all-encompassing and precise. Shuttle diplomacy are integral to achieving our objectives. The stumbling block is now is the execution, because there is a clear difference between the states agreed to do in a fora like this and what they do in practical. So there's a clear difference between what they discuss in forums like this and how they actually implement it.
Sani Michael Amakoje. Buhari's speech at the UN General Assembly was apt and appealing. In summary, Africa needs help, peace and development. However, to me, it's rather unfortunate that the people we are appealing to are the same people fueling crisis in Africa, as most of the war equipment are produced by them.
And this one is from Festus Akimboyewa. He says, Nigerians should be proud of President Muhammadu Buhari's speech at UNGA, particularly for discussing our country's progress and priority, and for exposing P&ID and other international companies trying to scam Nigeria. President Muhammadu Buhari is also right to draw the attention of the world to the bad side of social media, which is great. Tech companies must take President Muhammadu Buhari's warning seriously by ensuring that their technologies are designed ethically.
Okay, this is coming from Dele Jack Solomon. It says President Buhari should be commended for calling for strong action against xenophobia, racism and abject poverty, and for his concern about climate change, which has forced thousands to protest across the world, as well as terrorism and other forms of threats to life. Spot on.
And Prince Vikid at Vikad de Castle, he says, President Muhammadu Buhari seized the forum of the 74 UNGA to lament the financial woes P&ID almost plunged Nigeria into, insisting that he'll get to the bottom of the alleged scam.
Law Alpha said President Buhari's speech was succinct, timely and relevant. His call for global condemnation of xenophobia is germane in view of recurring experiences of Africans, particularly Nigerians, in South Africa.
Comrade Ngala says, excellent speech by President Muhammadu Buhari. He spoke for the whole of Africa. This demonstrates that we have unity in Africa. I like his speech because he touched on all the problems that affect Africa and Nigeria in general.
Abdul tweets, now the president's speech was inspiring, and it is our hope that the world will give our nation the chance to thrive. We've had enough setback. This is the time to break the cycle of underdevelopment due to corruption and other issues. We must all put our differences aside.
Utolo Sunday says, Mr. President made a serious and passionate speech at Hunger, and I hope he'll fulfill his promises, especially in the areas of involving youths, because youths are the drivers of any economy and development.
Now, we took Prince Vikad before. Steve Bond, 07, that's Stephen. He says, strong and commendable words from the president. He spoke well, but he needs to speak the same way on domestic issues at home with the same energy and passion. Long live Nigeria.
All right, those are the comments from our viewers via Twitter handle at NTAGMN. We'll take a short break. We still have Femi Adesina in New York, our guest in Lagos, and of course Ambassador Danladi here in Abuja. When we come back, we'll continue to x-ray other aspects of the president's speech. So stay with us.
Why don't you people sell imported materials here? As beautiful as the shop is.
Auntie, buying foreign goods does not help our economy. Neither does it boost local production. And the good thing is Nigerian-made products are high quality. Really? And to make Nigeria great again, that is why I only sell made in Nigeria products. Because change begins with me.
I'm convinced. Change begins with me too. Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
These days, people get their news and information from more media sources than ever before. Some of the news and information given are fake, unverified, doctored, and manufactured to create confusion, stir disaffection, and cause disunity. Before you believe or share any news, ask yourself, is this real? Is it from a credible source? Is it verified or verifiable? Fake news is dangerous. Whether you do it for fun or for political gains, real people can get hurt. Fake news, don't create it, don't spread it.
This is a public service announcement from NTA.
All right, welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We're still, of course, focusing on President Muhammadu Buhari's speech at the 74th session of the UN General Assembly. The President spoke yesterday, Tuesday, September the 24th. But, of course, the UN General Assembly is not just all about speeches and debates. The world leaders, of course, will make their speeches, and the audience will listen, and matters arising therefrom, we will proceed. Ambassador Danladi, I'm just wondering, there are other issues that the UN 74th session will have to deal with, and Nigeria has some interests, in terms of openings, in terms of seeking to have a voice, at critical organs of United Nations system.
Yeah, I think the outing of Mr. President is great, and at the same time, we having Professor Bande as the president of the 74th session really give us an advantage, greater visibility, and at the same time some influence to push certain agendas. I believe that Nigeria would be interested in some seats and positions in some international organizations like the International Maritime Organization, like the International Civil Aviation Council, the World Heritage Committee of UNESCO, and perhaps the membership of the Committee on Combating Terrorism. I think these international organizations will place Nigeria in a good vintage position to have a voice and to raise our voice to critical issues, especially in the areas of aviation. As you know, the aviation sector is still evolving in Nigeria, and there's a need for injection of capital, and at the same time to woo investors so that they can come and invest in the aviation sector. I want to also see this opportunity quickly to comment the Chief Executive of Airpeace, Mr. Allen Oyema, for decisively putting the Airpeace assets to evacuate Nigerians from South Africa following the xenophobic attack. I think this is great patriotism, and there's a need for us to really critically look at our aviation sector to see that we have a robust aviation that can really contribute to the growth of the country.
All right, thank you very much, Ambassador Danladi. Now back to Joshua Bolarinwa in our Lagos Network Center. One of the issues again that the President drew attention to, this has been on for a while, we would say for some decades now. There have been calls for the reform of the United Nations system itself, in particular the Security Council, and the need to enlarge the number of permanent members of the UN Security Council. Nigeria has had its own membership of the UN Security Council, but we're not a permanent member. Yesterday, President Muhammadu Buhari again brought in a different perspective, different but particularly useful, that the dynamics of the 21st century warrant an overhaul of the UN Security Council. What do you think?
Yes, of course. The dynamics of the 21st century warrants the expansion of the United Nations Security Council. Of course, the UN Security Council is the most powerful organ of the United Nations. So if you want to ensure equal participation of all the regions and continents of the world in global affairs, there is need for an African nation, particularly Nigeria, to be a member of the Security Council on a permanent basis. So what Nigeria is clamoring for is that the United Nations should be expanded, the Security Council membership should be expanded, particularly the membership with veto power. The membership with veto power. If Nigeria becomes a member of the United Nations Security Council carrying veto power, it will be a good indication for African development, African inclusion, and global equal participation. So it is a good thing for us to clamor for that. And this clamor, this shout, this request have been on the table for over 10 years. And the big powers, particularly the present permanent five, who are the US, UK, Russia, China, and France, they have been trying to avoid it so that some other countries will be carrying veto power. But Nigeria will keep pushing for it, and it was strategically put on the table by President Muhammadu Buhari so that Nigeria too becomes a permanent member of the United Nations. At least for now, let Africa and maybe one or two other regions have one permanent member to join the present five. If we have it, I think it's a plus for us. It will be a very good success on the security part, on the economic part, and even for political reasons. So expanding the Security Council and making Nigeria to become a permanent member is a good thing for us. And it will go a long way. Nigeria has always been a member of the Permanent Security Council on non-permanent basis for several occasions. But now we want to be a permanent member, and it's a good thing. And it's a good clamor by the president for us to be there. Even last year, the president mentioned it, and now the president also has mentioned it. I know if we continue to ask and ask and ask, one day the expansion will be granted, and Nigeria, by the grace of God, I believe that will become a permanent member of the United Nations of the Security Council.
Okay, I'm still with you, Joshua Bolarinwa in Lagos. One other matter President Buhari drew attention to was the essence of the the essence of the United Nations itself, namely multilateralism. In other words, concerted action by the nations of the world rather than unilateralism, which it says, look, will pose a great deal of danger. But we also saw, we have seen what has been playing out on the global stage, that a big power like the United States, for instance, would seek to go it alone rather than seeking to mobilize and galvanize the rest of the world in tandem with the ideals and philosophy of the United Nations. In your opinion, again, is it just a Trump era that is the cause of this, or the world may have to struggle for a while in balancing multilateralism against unilateralism that we find with the United States?
Yes, thank you. President Muhammadu Buhari was very quick to remind the world that multilateralism is being threatened, and that multilateralism, which began with the establishment and the formation of the League of Nations in 1919, just immediately after the end of World War I. And he said the League of Nations was replaced by the United Nations in 1945. And that multilaterally, the United Nations has achieved a lot, particularly in the area of preventing wars, preventing problems, global threats, and everything. But he has bittered his fear that this multilateralism is being threatened and is quickly being replaced by unilateralism and protectionism. And this quickly must be reverted, must be corrected. If not corrected, that is going to affect the world, and even the industrialized economies too will be affected. And that there is need to enhance multilateralism, global efforts, concerted efforts, enhanced efforts, joint efforts in fighting security threats, security problems, terrorism, poverty, in fighting also what we call sectionalism. So basically, this trend of unilateralism, I think, was championed by President Trump when he came in about 2 or 3 years ago, and he started saying everything is America, America first, America first. And before you know it now, everything trunked into what we call the trade war that we have seen between China and US, and that we are even seeing in the case of Europe and part of Asia now. So President Muhammadu Buhari is trying to remind the world that please, let us enhance multilateralism all over again. Let us enhance global efforts all over again. Let us encourage joint efforts all over again, so that sectionalism, unilateralism will not threaten our global efforts which we have achieved. So we hope President Trump, who was also at that meeting, will be able to do well and listen to that advice the Nigerian president gave on the need to enhance multilateralism.
All right, thank you very much, Joshua Bolarinwa. Very quickly, let's go to Femi, who is in New York. Ambassador Dauda Danladi, when he began his speech, said that though the United Nations is the world's parliament, its powers are still limited. And of course, this year marks 100 years of the founding of the League of Nations, which eventually led to the United Nations. How well do you think the UN has benefited the world and indeed Africa?
I didn't quite get that question.
I said, since this year marks 100 years of marking the League of Nations, of course, that eventually led to the United Nations. How well do you think the United Nations has benefited Africa and, of course, the world?
Oh, I think quite well. It's beneficial to Africa, indeed to the rest of the world, that you have the United Nations. Otherwise, there will be impunity in the world. When people who are prone to impunity, particularly leadership or some warlords, when they remember that there will be consequences, particularly under the auspices of the United Nations, which is like the rest of the world against that person or that country, I think they will think twice. It's good for Africa that the continent is active in the United Nations. It's good for the whole world. Even America, that may have a tendency towards unilateralism, still recognizes that the United Nations is a vital force, is a potent force, and each American president still identifies with the general debate, comes to speak there. You will see that before President Obama left, he kept re-emphasizing the need for the world to pull together. President Trump may not be of the same mind, but then his policy of America for Americans is a local policy, so to speak. But when it comes to the rest of the world, he still gives a place for the United Nations. I think it's good for the world. The League of Nations came, it died. It seems that the United Nations has learned a lesson from what killed the League of Nations. And it's good for Africa, good for Nigeria, good for the world.
Femi, let me still stay with you. In the president's address yesterday, there was a specific mention of P&ID, that is Projects on Investment or International Development, which got into what is now emerging as obviously a bogus contract, for which it has now received an arbitration award of $9.6 billion US, probably the first of its kind in history. Did President Buhari deliberately raise that issue to put the world on notice as to the scam that Nigeria is facing on account of P&ID and its collaborators?
Thank you. You may not be quite wrong to say that, but note that he said it in the same breath as he talked about anti-corruption. The fact that he said this government was fighting corruption frontally led to mention of P&ID. So I think it was just ancillary that P&ID came in as the president spoke about fighting corruption frontally. He said it was a scam, that Nigeria was about being ripped off, but Nigeria will fight it. So I think it's a notice. It's a notice to the world, it's a notice to P&ID itself, and it's a notice to anybody who is of the same mind, thinking that Nigeria could be ripped off. I think it was very significant. It was a good time to say it. You notice that the president has not personally spoken about P&ID since the saga broke open. But he chose the best platform in the world to now speak about it. It's good for Nigeria.
All right, thank you very much, Femi. We're almost rounding up on the program. We'll come to you very briefly for your closing thoughts. But let's get the closing thoughts of Ambassador Dauda Danladi. how do we begin to marshal home some of the points that the president has raised at August 74? What is next for Nigeria after this?
I think all hands should be on deck to ensure the implementation of various programs that the government has put in place in Nigeria towards the eradication of poverty and hunger, and at the same time to support our armed forces that are fighting Boko Haram, so that we can achieve greater success in that direction. In the same breath, I would like to quickly say that my take would be on the call to end xenophobia. Xenophobia is a big distraction, and it is an irritant that has a tendency to put out Africa's diplomatic move towards unity in a country. And I think if solution is found to address the issue of rising xenophobia in Africa, that will be a great achievement. So I think the president has done well, and all it takes is for all Nigerians to join hands together so that we can ensure the full implementation of most of the programs that have been put in place towards sustainable development in Nigeria.
And just still with you, just the question I asked Femi a while ago with regard to the president specifically mentioning P&ID and the scam that he says it is against the Nigerian treasury.
I think he has raised a red flag, and I think Mr. Femi has adequately addressed this question. I think what is really required is for us to be cautious and at the same time to be alert when dealing with issues of that nature. And going forward, as Femi has mentioned, it is in the same context with the issue of fighting corruption. And I can see a silver lining in the sky as we move forge ahead towards the development of our country and the African continent.
All right, Femi, let's get your closing thoughts very, very briefly. Beyond UNGA 74, what is next?
Yes, let me also point out the significance of a period of time in that meeting yesterday. You had our president speaking on behalf of about 200 million Nigerians. You had the president of the session there, a Nigerian, and you had the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, a Nigerian. I think it was a very proud time for Nigeria. That shows that Nigeria cannot be swept aside in the scheme of things, in the Community of Nations now. And it's good that we begin to build on that advantage, because it's an advantage for Nigeria. And I pray that we continue to build on it.
All right. Femi, additional special advisor to the president on media and publicity, would like to thank you for being part of our conversation this morning. We hope you're able to catch some sleep before you have your breakfast and then get into your crowded schedule later on with the president and his entourage.
Thank you.
Okay, we also would like to thank Dr. Joshua Bolarinwa, who's an associate professor at the Institute of International Affairs on Victoria Island in Lagos. Bolarinwa, thank you for being part of our discussion this morning.
Thank you.
And of course, right here with us in the studios, Nigeria's former ambassador to Pakistan, Ambassador Dauda Danladi. Thank you always for being with us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much.
Okay, all right. That does it for our conversation segment. And just to indicate that, of course, we saw what happened in 1990 when the late General Joe Garba was also Nigeria's president of the UN General Assembly, 1989 to 1990. That was about 30 years or so ago. Yeah. And that was also a very significant development that we had in foreign relations. This time is Ambassador Tijani Mohammed Bande, who is in charge. So congratulations to Nigeria and to Nigerians. Let's go over now to the world of sports.
Nigerian Golden Eaglets had an overwhelming attacking football on display as the five-time world champion scored 4 goals within 25 minutes on play and one more in the second half to ensure a 5-1 victory over Guatemala on match day 2 of the UEFA Cup on the 17th international tournament in Istanbul, Turkey on Tuesday. Olakunle Olusegun's fifth goal unsettled Guatemala, and as they were still trying to gather themselves together, Abdullahi Fawaz rattled them again with his goal in the 10th minute. Eaglets continued their attacking forays into the vital area of Guatemala, and it was another goal 7 minutes later when David Oduko, a left back, registered his name on the score sheet. Mercurial left-footed attacking midfielder Akinwumi Omo made it goal number 4 for the Eaglets in the 24th minute. The second half saw Nigeria missing some goal-scoring opportunities, but Ibrahim Jabbar was very clinical with his sublime goal in the 84th minute to make it 5-1 against the Guatemalans. The Golden Eaglets will play their last game of the UEFA Cup on the 17th International Tournament on Thursday against West African rivals Senegal. In tennis, Andrew Murray earned his first singles victory at the tour level since January with a 3-set win over Tennis Sangren in the first round of the Yohai Championship in China. Murray continued his comeback from his hip resurfacing surgery by winning 6-3, 6-7, 6-1. He will play Australian world number 31 Alex de Monaire in the second round. This win over American Sangren is his first on the ATP Tour since beating James Duckworth at the Brisbane International on 1st January.
All right, now let's join our foreign desk for some stories on the foreign scene as the British parliamentarians resume work today, Wednesday, after 5 UK Supreme Court ruling against Prime Minister's Parliament suspension. Oyemi Ajayi has more details on that.
British parliamentarians returned to work on Wednesday after UK's Supreme Court decreed that Prime Minister Boris Johnson's controversial 5-week suspension of Parliament was unlawful. In a unanimous verdict, the 11 justices at the UK's Apex Court ruled that Parliament had effectively not been prorogued, upholding the decision by the Scottish Court of Appeal in Edinburgh on September 11 and paving the way for the House of Commons to resume at 11:30 a.m. on Wednesday. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson had maintained that his move was to prepare his scheduled Queen's speech on October 14, a highly ceremonial occasion in which the British monarch outlines the government's legislative programme. Boris Johnson is the third UK Conservative Party leader to assume the position of the British Prime Minister in the Brexit era, after the resignation of David Cameron in June 2016 and Theresa May earlier this year. Opposition politicians, including Scotland's SNP First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, had called on him to step down.
Okay, let's join our entertainment desk now.
Sports is entertainment, and entertainment is sport. So what's life without music? What's life without sport? So just enjoy sportainment. I think this is what we've been talking about, that our artists should try to, go back to the roots and bring something out. And that's what they've done, depicting the culture of Western Nigeria, the Yoruba people to be precise. They are showcasing everything about the Yorubas, their culture, their artifacts, their mode of dressing, their lifestyle, food, and the way they like to spend money, the Owambe thing and all those things. Listen to this song, you feel the bata, you feel the apala, you feel so many things about the Yoruba music.
Cause I don't send anybody, they no be SMS.
The originality of the song and the originality of the lyrics, the choice of the chorus, the fusion of Apala, so to say, Haruna Ishola and those older guys who are late now. Having said that, it's a brilliant idea for them to have been able to bring these different ideas, different genres of music together to give us something that is at least acceptable by the old and the young.
And that wraps up Good Morning Nigeria for today. We thank you for watching. See you again tomorrow morning for another edition. I'm Rhoda Anonam.
And I'm Kingsley Osadulo. I join Rhoda in thanking you for tuning in. As you say, we're back tomorrow, same time, 7 in the morning. Have a wonderful day ahead.